Paper discussion, the Platonic Representation Hypothesis. This is one of the most important papers that I've read in recent years, and we also actually put it in our half-year report. Check it out on our website. So this is the first time we actually linked an academic paper in our discussion of the half-year. So just to illustrate how important this paper is. So what this paper is saying in a nutshell, it's a theoretical foundation for the concept of the bitter lesson, or scale is all you need. So it's saying that there is a hypothesis that intelligence, as we understand it in the AI community and as humans, converges to a representation that is modality independent, some sort of abstract version of intelligence that represents knowledge and a coordinate system that helps agents in navigating the real world, a coordinate system that is independent of tasks, of modalities. In other words, something that is Platonic. That's what Platonic means. There is also a very nice relationship here, a literary relationship. It's called the Karenina model of intelligence. All happy families are alike. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways. The first line of the Karenina novel by Tolstoy. And here the analogy would be all happy models are alike and all unhappy models are unhappy in their own ways. In other words, we have this Platonic general representation of intelligence. What that means in a nutshell is what we've been suspecting for a while now. We've learned in 2024 at CVPR that there's transfer learning between, let's say, robots and LLMs. We then thought that, well, that could be because of navigation, or in other words, you have transfer learning, let's say, full self-driving and humanoid robots. They seem to have transfer learning between them. And we ask ourselves, why would that be the case? Why would learning how to navigate driving be helpful for a humanoid robot? We then argued that, well, it could be that because it's a navigation problem. I think we were still sort of in this anthropocentric worldview. We were trying to understand it from a limited perspective, when in reality, the answer is the Platonic representation of intelligence. There is a certain optimal function space that represents all known actions that humans possess, at least here on Earth. Let's keep it simple and not go into multiverse theory and things like that. So given the laws of physics, and given our existence as we've evolved over billions of years from nothing to organisms to today, there is a certain Platonic representation of intelligence. Now, what is intelligence? In our view, we use this working definition of intelligence. It's a technology that helps us navigate the real world. That's what intelligence is. And this Platonic representation of intelligence is just the vector space that represents the necessary knowledge that we can use to navigate the real world. And in this paper, they argue that that representation seems to be independent of modalities and tasks. That's in a nutshell what they're saying. The implications of that are that with large-scale and general models, we might be able to capture this Platonic representation of intelligence. Actually, what they're saying is even more interesting. They're saying that if we don't go large and general, we might even miss that. What they're saying is that, let's say you have a hypothesis space 1 and hypothesis space 2. In other words, you have the hypothesis that, for example, self-driving is in a certain space, in the multi-Hilbert space of vectors, and let's say writing poems is in another space. And if you don't have a large enough model, then these spaces could be independent, and you might have the impression that you have to train specific models for translation, specific models for poem writing, and specific models for self-driving. If you have a large enough model, you will realize that all these hypothesis spaces eventually converge to one big Platonic representation where you can translate French, drive a car, cook a meal and fight MMA fight. All of these things are eventually represented in the same Platonic representation of intelligence. I think humans have a certain inclination for that. For example, when I was in my teenage years, I was involved in a rock band, and I remember vividly we were at a concert. It might have been Guns N' Roses or something like that. It was the 80s, and one of my friends said that we said something along the lines of, "Yeah, these guys are interesting, but they're all drunks and kind of stupid or something." And then one of my friends said, "No, I think if you're that good as a musician, you probably are much more intelligent than you think." In other words, being very good at playing an instrument or dancing like a Baryshnikov, or maybe playing basketball like LeBron James, also implies that you probably have a certain intelligence that could be applicable to other things. Now, why aren't humans using that? Why don't we see Nobel Prize winners also winning NBA trophies? That, of course, has practical implications. In other words, just having the raw intelligence is not enough. You need to practice, you need to get lucky, you need to path dependence, you need to be at the right time, at the right place. If you grow up in North Korea, you might not have the opportunity to win neither a Nobel Prize nor an NBA championship, but you still might have that intelligence. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. But what it also, I think, implies, and this is actually the really, maybe the biggest insight of this paper, is that if we go really large and general, then we can develop this general purpose technology, or this general purpose Platonic representation of intelligence. And that's something humans can't do, because humans, no matter how much effort they make, of course, we're limited by our physical existence. We're limited by, for example, also our lifetime, right? Let's say a large GPU cluster of training technology can live much longer in principle than humans, or train much broader. We humans, we can't be in many places at the same time. We don't have, model parallelism and space parallelism. I can't be in Switzerland and in California and in China right now at the same time. But a model could potentially be at the same time in many places, thanks to parallelism, something that NVIDIA is pushing. Of course, parallelism is all you need, and things along those lines. So having said that, I think what we want to emphasize in this paper is the theoretical foundation of the concept of large general models that converge to a Platonic representation of intelligence. This is, in my opinion, the key takeaway of this paper. The technicalities, the proofs, the things that are necessary to make this paper academic are, I would say, secondary here. They're important, of course. We don't want to just read news articles here. This is still an academic paper. It's an archive and things like that. It's a serious paper. But I think it's an inspiration more than anything else. It's an inspiration. It's also a foundation that justifies the large-scale deployment of compute clusters and training data. And I think it emphasizes the importance of large general data sets. So the more general and the more large you are, the bigger, the better chance you have to get to that representation of that Platonic intelligence. I think that's the strategy, for example, that Musk is using with Grok. I think what we also see, and this is now, we're getting a little bit more towards our positions here at Orange Capital Partners. For new listeners, just as a tangent here, why are we talking about academic papers? Well, we talk about academic papers because the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. That's the fundamental idea. That's what we're here for. And we have large positions in NVIDIA and Tesla. And why do we have large positions in NVIDIA and Tesla? It's precisely because we think that both of these companies are following the path of the Anna Karenina path of intelligence. All happy models are alike, and therefore a large-scale general training of intelligence will yield interesting results. Maybe there's a higher likelihood that we will have outcomes where these companies succeed in delivering products and services and monetize their products. For example, just today, there was an announcement that Lucid, Uber, and Neuro are partnering in developing technology, self-drive technology. And of course, the market is always asking the same question: oh, are these now serious competitors? Can they compete with Tesla on robotaxi? The answer is no. And partly it's because of the scale, like we've said in many episodes before, that we think the fundamental winner in the robotics market will be the person or the company that has the lowest cost per mile or per something. It's cost per something. That's the key. And Neuro, Lucid, and Uber are trying. I guess what they're trying to do here is find a niche in a high luxury type of autonomous driving space, which might work, might not work. We don't think it will work, not just because of market pressures, cost pressures, things like that, but fundamentally also because of this Platonic representation of intelligence. Like, you need large scale training and data. Also, you need to collect the data. So the robotaxi fleet of Tesla will be collecting data. Also with Grok, it will be collecting, let's say, something like feedback from customers. It will be collecting maintenance data. So the larger scale will help Tesla become a much better AI company because of this idea of the Platonic representation of intelligence, versus these niche players will never even be able to get there. So that's the thesis. I think this thesis is, I don't think I can do enough justice here to convey how important this is, because this is the theoretical foundation of the concept that large-scale general models, the bitter lesson, eventually will yield to what we call intelligence, and have companies, suppliers of intelligence, win in the marketplace. This is not just a nice to have or one approach. This is the approach. The bitter lesson is the approach, and I think Sutton's comments might have been driven through empirical experience, or maybe even he suspected that this is the case. Maybe he's not part of the author suite on this particular paper, but he definitely anticipated this, and I think that's why he deserves the Field Medal. And I think he's one of the most important theoretical researchers in the field of AI, because the bitter lesson, I think it's going to go in. I think it's going to go into the annals of science, a little bit like the general relativity of Einstein. It's going to become the foundation of the science of intelligence. It's going to become the foundation of science, period, because it shows that the approach towards achieving the most effective representation of intelligence, or in other words, the most effective representation of technology that helps people solve problems, that helps people navigate tasks, that helps people actually do science, that the most effective approach towards that technology is going to be one of large-scale general models, multimodality, large diverse data sets, and large compute time. This is the key. Very important. I think we've spoken about this in different contexts already. For example, the necessity of large diverse data sets. I think even basic statistics courses would supplement that. Large compute, of course, has been the winner, as NVIDIA and others have shown us. And what we're getting now with this paper is, again, it's a theoretical foundation, which is really important, because that means this is not just some anecdotal approach towards a problem. It is the explanation for why this approach works, and that's really important for for research and also for us investors. It gives us a better foundation for it gives us a better foundation for the positioning of our portfolio. Thank you.